I'm Mark Canuel. I'm director of the Institute for the Humanities at UIC. Welcome to our very first event of the year. I hope that all of you are safe and well on campus and having a great semester so far. I know that I am. Great to see our students and faculty actually walking around physically, and I've even, had some, little awkward fist bumps and elbow bumps with people. It's like what we do rather than hug nowadays. But that feels fine. Upcoming events, we have our Humanities Summit tomorrow via Zoom from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock. If you would like to register for that, I hope you will join us for all or part of it. You can find out more about it on our website, and you can contact Linda Vavra at huminst, HUMINST, at uic.edu to register. You can also contact her, or rather us at the Institute, to register for Freddie Gonzalez's talk. It's coming up on September 23rd at 4 p.m. We are going to be holding it for a limited audience in SCE and also simultaneously having it on Zoom. So we're being flexible. However you can make it, we will accommodate you. And so I hope that you can join us for these and other events, which you can find out about by going to our website and following us on social media. So welcome to our Institute for the Humanities Fellowship Workshop. I'm so pleased to introduce our guest speakers today, and we're really grateful to them for joining us to give us different perspectives on the how, the where, the when, of the if, of how of applying for fellowships, both internal and external fellowships. Claudia Kinkela is a senior program officer in the National Endowment for the Humanities Division of Research. She'll be going first today. She's been coordinating the fellowships program for the last 12 years, and she's worked with other programs in that division. She is a political scientist by training and received her PhD from the University of Erlangen, Nuremberg in 1998. And before coming to the NEH in 2008, she taught at Duke, Georgetown, and American University. Up next, after that, will be our very own Jeffrey Sklansky, who is professor of history at UIC. He specializes in the intellectual and social history of capitalism in 18th and 19th century America. He teaches courses on and writes about the history of capitalism, radicalism in America, and the American intellectual tradition. He is the author of two books: The Soul's Economy, Market Society and Selfhood in American Thought, 1820 to 1920, and Sovereign of the Market, The Money Question in Early America, which was published by the UIC Press in 2017. His current project, for which he received an Institute for the Humanities Faculty Fellowship just last year, is Grassroots Property, Making Land on America's Middle Border, 1850 to 1900. Jeff will share his personal thoughts and experiences about the application process, and we'll start that after Claudia speaks to us, just telling us about the NEH fellowships, and we'll have a question and answer period with her following her presentation. So Dr. Kinkela, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mark, for the nice introduction. I appreciate it. I'm so happy to be able to do this today. In another lifetime, we would be coming in person and talking to you about NEH grant opportunities and our review process. So Mark has asked me to speak for about 20 minutes or so about our research programs, and please feel free, if there are any questions, I can stop at any time. You can ask in between or after I present to you what I have. So because time is short and NEH has so many programs, I think my biggest message, and that's the next slide, Mark, is for you to apply. Well, first of all, apply. So apply and apply more often. So you might have heard that the NEH programs are competitive, and I'll tell you, I have a little slide later on how competitive they are. But the message is, if you don't apply, you won't get a grant, obviously. It's easier said than done. So I want to talk about that. Apply. That's message number one. Message number two is there are a lot of tools out there you can use that I'm also going to show you a few of those. And one of the tools is in the guidelines. A lot of people are scared by the guidelines. They're a little bit long and tedious. And so that's one thing I want to pay attention to today. And the third point here is, if you don't take anything away today, other than the knowledge that you can talk to one of us. So we are actually there to talk to you by email, by phone. Every single program has its own email address that you can use, and I promise you will get an answer. Some are faster than others, but you will be able to get through. Sometimes people say, "Oh, there's a live person," and we take pride in that. So please use that. And now you know me, so I'll have my email at the end here as well. Next slide. So first of all, question, so who are we? The National Endowment for the Humanities. You don't need to read that slide. That's a definition that was part of our founding statute in 1965. You'll find it on the website. All this wants to say is that we have a very capacious understanding of the humanities. So either you're in a field that's directly related to humanities, so all the history, all religion, ethics, philosophy, all the usual humanities are, of course, in our portfolio, but we also support other areas like social science, even the natural science, if they have a humanities component. So let's say if you are in the social sciences and you have a humanities question or a method, we call it, so it's fine, then you also apply to us. Anything that has history in front of it, I like to say, if you have a history of medicine, a history of science, you're also in the right place, so come to us. So either the method or the way you question anything, if you are close to that area, even if you have other parts, you can apply to us. And we like to say we then put it on the applicant to explain to us or the reviewer what it is that makes it a humanities project, or even just that one part. So you can apply, and using the criteria, you want to tell the reviewer what it is that makes it humanities. So that's very important for those disciplines that are what I call them borderline social, like all my anthropologists, my political scientists, my psychology people, history of science is already there, but those are the areas that need a little bit more explanation in the narrative than the others, but they're all very welcome. And we see much more of that now with the overlap, environmental humanities, digital humanities, disability studies is huge, that there's a crossover. Philosophy has a huge crossover with neuroscience. So all of those are welcome. All right, the 66,300 projects here, that's how many projects we have funded. And again, that's just a way of saying we're there for you. We're a taxpayer funded agency, so please use us and try and apply. And this is the website. I put that on there for you. Check it out, and I'll show a few slides as well. Let's keep going. So I put together, when we talked with Mark, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to show you what you've done so far and where we are. We've been founded in 1967, so that the statistics go back to that. So 727 applications from just UIC 206 awards, and that's a ratio of 28%. That's huge. So that's a very, very nice success ratio. And I'm showing this to you just to encourage you to sort of keep going. The national average is about 17%. So, and comparing with the other UIC systems, you're in the same level I checked. And comparing with Northwestern, for example, that's close. They also have a similar ratio. So you're in a really good place, and I would like to encourage to keep going. I noticed that in the past few years there weren't as many, and I don't know what the story is there, but I saw a lot in earlier periods, and I found, so this is the fun fact, I found that from the first year we even sent out, we funded anything. 1967, there was one fellowship for UIC, and then in 1968 as well. I didn't even have a title. The database was too old. So, but that's, let's keep going. So that's to encourage you to apply. What is the next? The next slide is an explanation of, these are the 7 grant divisions that NEH has. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but just for you to know. So this is like your bird's eye view. We have a variety of programs. We have about 40 programs in the endowment. And depending on your interests, you can go different ways. We do exhibitions, we do digital, we do documentaries, we do museum and preservation, but I'll focus on research today, which is my own division, and hopefully get to the one program in education I'd like to mention. And if you have questions about those, please feel free to ask me. I'm just going to move on to research, which I think is probably of the most interest to you right now. So inside the research division, here we go. Here are our programs. And the way we think about the programs, we have one side that's for individual and the other side that's for institutions. So that difference is important for you to know, that the individual grants, they're actually tied to your person. You apply from your home computer. You will be the recipient, not the institution. You will be the recipient of the fellowship. If you were to move to another institution, the money is yours. You'll take it with you. If you apply for an institutional grant, it's the opposite. Then the money stays with the institution, and the application has to go through the institution. So I'm going to focus on the individuals for now, and there are these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 here. Highlighted. I'm going to start with fellowships, which is my own home program, and it's the oldest program in the endowment. It's the most competitive program in the endowment. We can go on, and it's for a grant for 6 to 12 months. If you want to apply, the deadline's in April. I think it's the next slide. April. Actually, I skipped sort of the kinds we fund. So if you're wondering, well, what kinds of products do we fund for fellowships, is still mostly the gold standard is still a book, but there are many other forms. Sometimes people write articles depending on the discipline. Some disciplines don't do monographs anymore. You can do multi-authored volumes, translations, and editions, and digital projects. And you can use it for writing, for research, for travel to archives, convening for the collaborations. They have conferences and other collaborations. So if we go on, we'll look at the fellowship. That's the heart, really I think the biggest program for individuals. We have the amount is $5,000 a month, or the maximum would be $60,000 for 12 months, and you have to take it full time, continuous, and it's on any subject really of your choosing. If you have questions on content, I'm just going to move on for now to show you what there is. For example, I put I put examples here from UIC. So this is where I stumbled because the last one I found for fellowships was 2008. So I think it's time for another fellowships. I found going way back, they were like 3 and 4 and 5 in a year sometimes. So those are examples of books here. You have American Telecommunication, and the other one I think is in philosophy here in Darwin. Let's to the next slide. So fellowships. So if you decide, the summer stipends is another very neat program. If you decide, this is like for people like to use it to replace summer teaching. It's a small program of $6,000 for 2 months of either people like to travel in the summer for archival research, ethnographic research, anything you can do in 2 months. The deadline is actually next week, I believe, for this time. The only difference here is we only accept 2 applications per institution, and you would have to be nominated by the institute. So you have to do that in advance. And so this would be probably if you haven't applied this year, then this would be an opportunity for next year. There are, although they're very small, also competitive, almost as much as fellowships, but they're wonderful little sort of opportunities for people who do want to do research in the summer. I think I have an example in the next slide too of UIC. And there is 2012, History of Disability, and another, I think, philosophy proposal in 2005. So those were the ones I found at UIC. Do you have any questions for me right now before I move on? Fellowships and summer stipends are probably the two with the most numbers of applications. Okay, let's move on then. I will come to the statistics in a minute. There's one more I wanted to notice. If somebody likes to do digital publications, there's a program called NEH Mellon. So that's a cooperation between NEH and the Mellon Foundation for people who work on projects. It's very similar to fellowships, but has to be born digital. So it's not an ebook that we'd like to see, but more of something where you have embedded music clips or embedded film clips, or something that has to be digital, but is still scholarly at the same time. Otherwise, it's the same as fellowship. So it's for 12 months, 6 to 12 months, same amount of money, similar deadline in April. And then there's one more I want to mention. And they're all on this sheet, actually, that I think Mark sent around. So there's this one page of all of our programs that you should have in your inbox. They're described there as well. And the last one here is for the individual programs I think that's now in its 5th year. It's called Public Scholars. It is for books that reach a broader audience than the fellowship. So these are meant to have higher print copies, so more for general audience, but still scholarly researched. And there's been some wonderful books coming out of that program. They have a December deadline, and the difference between that and fellowships is that you need to have a publisher, a letter, or some kind of commitment, and think about the print run numbers in advance. So that's maybe for, I don't know, you have a scholarly book, and then this would be for a general audience. All right. So those were the individual programs, and here are my statistics. So fellowships, right now, we have a funding ratio of 7%. Summer stipends is a little bit higher at 10%. And public scholars is at 9%. So they're all around that number. And I'm showing you this. It's just a question of so we would love to fund more, obviously. We have all these wonderful projects. we see every year, and we just have this limited budget, and so we get about 80 projects we can fund every year. So that should sort of tell you that you might not, give up after the first time. I've seen projects come back a second time, a third time, just because that's the end of the budget. So the good thing about if you apply and we apply is one of the nice things, I think, what NEH does, we will send you out we'll send the comments to you. So whatever the reviewers say about your project, even if you don't get it, you will get some kind of feedback, which should help you think about the project and then reapply. So I think that's a valuable service that is sort of independent from getting the grant. So I tell people, even if you think you have an extra year, you want to apply in 2 years, I would say apply right away, because then you will get the feedback. And it's you only have a 7 or 8% chance. So I would use that extra year to apply. It's more work for us, but it's better for you to apply and then see what's the feedback. And I say, oh, you can see I'm in this range, and then you can try again whenever the time for the sabbatical is right. That's just one of the little sort of strategies to use in thinking about applying. All right, I think I need to move on. There's also just a couple of notes on the fact that we do have collaborative research programs. So if you are in a collaboration with somebody, we broke them up in 4 separate kinds. Planning conferences or a planning collaboration is one thing that if you're not ready to jump into a full project, there are no planning stages that you can apply for. Think about that. That's sort of up to $25,000. It could be a workshop, getting together to plan. Then the conferences themselves, and then there's a group for a manuscript or for digital projects. So all of these are possible in whatever area you're working in with colleagues. Collaborations, at least 2 people on the same level, so 2 equal partners for the collaboration. And in contrast to our individual programs, these programs, I recommend that highly. They all read drafts, so you don't have to go cold in applying in December. You can send in a draft, and you will get some feedback from staff. And these are different. These are a little bit longer applications. The individuals are fairly short. Fellowships is 3 single-spaced pages. These are, I think, 15 to 20 pages. So they take a little bit more time. And then the next slide, we have, I had an example for you here, 2011-2009 from UIC. Both are, I think, archaeology projects. So you seem to be strong on the archaeology side of things. That's great. So just as an example, and then also noting we do fund translations and editions. They're very similar to collaborations. It could be 2 scholars or more. And if you have those, please send in a draft. I'm not going to go into them. And there was one example there as well, 2014, from UIC. Okay. So 2 more programs, and then I'm going to run off to the strategies and tips. Because you guys have a strong archaeology department, there is one new program which we separated them out from the collaborative program, and this is for empirical field research. So if you have projects in that area, please take a look at the description of this program. And the deadline for this year is coming up very soon, but please make a note of that as well. And that's the end of research already. I'm just running through these so I can hopefully get to your questions. And then from our division of education, if you don't know about those summer programs, I think these are one of our highlights. You can bring people together in a group. There's summer seminars. These are for teachers K through 12 and college teachers. You can bring in experts and talk, like 2-week seminars, 10 days, 2 weeks, talk about historic topics, anything, religion, philosophy. And if you have a site, let's say if you wanted to have a seminar on Gettysburg, let's say, then you can, those are the landmarks. If you have a landmark, you can organize it around that site and group it. These are wonderful, wonderful projects. I would just really recommend. And people say they've changed their lives or careers 10, 15 years after these. You can apply as a participant, and there's a list. There's no new runs, there's no new list out there yet for some reason, but the past list is on line. You can see what kinds of projects there are. And if you've participated as a participant, you can also at some point apply to be a director of one. So you don't have to direct one the first time. It might be better to see how these go as a participant, and then unless you're very ready to jump, but please look at the list and see if that's of interest to you. So those are some of the programs. We're just gonna skip those. Not talk. Yeah, you just keep going. I have there's also programs to develop new curriculum development for classes. If you work outside, like with one humanities and one science or social science faculty member, there are also wonderful grants out there for that. I think I want to finish the programs and talk a little bit of the how to get about. That's still more programs. As I said, we have 40 programs. I'm not going to be able to talk about the digital. We all do digital at all times. If you're interested, let me know. There are options out there. There we go. So now I want to take a minute to talk about how to apply. Next slide, please. So those are the same things I said before. So if you don't apply, you don't get a grant. And then those, one of the secrets or not so secrets is that you really want to plan these early and also just keep applying. Just do it even if something's off, just keep sending them in, because that's just the way the cycles work. The biggest pitfall, some people ask, what is it that what are the mistakes, is not following instructions and reading the guidelines, because if the grants are so competitive, reviewers will take anything they can. There's so many good applications, they will find anything that makes them easier for them to review. And so if something's off on even the format side of things, then, or typos, like little things, because sometimes they have a hard time deciding. So just get rid of those, read the instructions, and they're supposed to be helpful, although they don't look helpful, but there are some things in the guidelines that are helpful. So hopefully you'll be able. So the second biggest pitfall is there are tools out there that I want to show you might use. So next slide is prepare early. So that's the first thing. So if you want to apply in April, I'm just talking fellowships. If you want to apply in April, I would start as early as you can, drafting and circulating it amongst colleagues and friends and getting that out. And secondly, checking out grants.gov. So because we're a federal funder, we have to, everybody has to go through grants.gov. And so make sure that you know how to get to grants.gov and have a password. They change it every 6 months, I think, or 3 months. You have to change your password. So please check out grants.gov and make sure it's current. That's my first. Then our website is a wonderful tool to use. There are lots of samples. Each program has samples. So that's one of the tools. If you say, oh, I don't know how to write my narrative, just go in this program and look at the samples. And I tell people, just use the phrase, even use the phrasing. If you don't know how to talk about the significance of your project, look at these samples and see how they talk about significance, because that's the first criterion, is what is the significance of your project to the humanities. So use the help that's already there. Yes, let's go to the next one. What do I have there? So this is our website. It's a bad image, I think, but where the red line is, there's on top, there's a tab that says grants. So I don't know if you can see it here, but it's on our website where it says grants. You can just click on grants and you can either scroll down through all the grants or put in fellowships, and then you go to the next page. Oh, here it is. Yeah, here it says in red, it says grants. Okay, so there it is. So if you click on that, the next slide, and I could do this live, but so then you go to grants, and then here you can see search all grant programs and search all past awards. So this is a helpful tool for you to see, okay, what programs are there? What kind of awards have we made before? Next slide. Next slide is another tool that I really, nope, that's not the tool yet. Okay, this is the landing page of fellowships. And here you can see everything from the deadline to the right. So this is an old one. So this is the right. You have everything you need on the first landing page. Next slide. And then if you keep scroll, you just need to scroll down. That's the way the designer made it. Here, fellowships guideline PDF. This is where the guidelines are. They are right there on this landing page. There is the application package. If you click on the fellowshipsgrants.gov application package, it will take you to grants.gov. So it's here. And then if you keep scrolling down, you'll have all the samples. So you see there's like 10 samples on the bottom here. So those are helpful tools right on this page. And another tool, this is the tool I really like, Project Funded Query Form. It's also on the bottom of the main website page. There is a line that says Funded Query Form. And here you say, oh, let's see, I'm in theater studies or performance. Let's see what does NEH, or what did they fund on whatever, on Shakespeare or on the American founding, whichever. And you can put it in and you will get the same results as I would if I'm looking for something inside our database. So this goes back to our database and will tell you the things that we have funded. So that's another neat tool of just getting a feel for what we've funded. And the next slide will show you the much hated grants.gov site. I want to say, just play with it, look at it, get familiar with it. This is not made for individual grants. So it's a little bit confusing at first, because 99% of all federal grants are for institutions, and like fellowships, we're one of the very few individual programs. But they made it easier over the last 2 years. So you just need to put in the opportunity number, and hopefully it'll take you to the right place. And they have a 24/7 hotline as well. All right, those are the tools. Do I still have time to talk about the review process? What do you want me to do? Yes,
I think you can touch on that. Yeah.
just a bit. So, our review process is really long. Again, we're a federal funder. We have a lot of rules to transparency. And so if you think about applying in April, then you need to think for your project, you need to think you will not hear from us until December of, so 2022, you apply in 2020, in April 22, you will not hear from us in December. And you want to think about what does it mean for my project? So I'm going to talk about my project. The earliest I can start the fellowship is in January of 2023. So that means something for how you craft the narrative, and you can talk about where you are in the project right now, where you want to be next year, and then where you want to be when you start the fellowship. And you don't have to be by the time you apply, you don't have to be finished with the project by the end of the fellowships period. But you want to give us a sense of where you are at all times. That's something that we do look at carefully, the timeline. And the other thing, so you see here, so these are the steps. This is like 7-8 months worth of time. We have the review panels, and that leads me to the next slide. Who's your audience? Who are you writing this for? Sometimes it's that applications come in from certain disciplines. They're very inward oriented, and they're jargony, and they write for a specific academic audience. So if you apply to a federal funder like us, we'd like you to write for a broader audience. So your audience is the other peer reviews. They will, and who are they? They are from your fields, but they might also be from neighboring fields. So we don't have panels in just one discipline, other than maybe if you're an American historian, you get lucky. But if you're in a discipline where we don't have as many applications, we mix them up with other disciplines. So you want to make sure you can talk to your own discipline, but also to others, literature and, other literatures like European, American. They can be all in one panel. So that's your first audience. Then you have staff, the audience of staff that might or might not be in your field. You have the National Council, which is our board. They also come from all areas. And then finally the chairman. So remember that audience before you start writing, and taking a little bit of a distance, I think, to your own field. Next is sort of that's a summary of what I was trying to say. So write for both your own specialists, but also generalists, avoid jargon, anticipate maybe questions that could arise. And the way to do that is, I think, to distribute it beforehand to other people who might give you that sense. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? And get some feedback. And finally, address the evaluation criteria. So that's the first thing. Next slide. First thing I would look at before I even want to start my application writing is look at the evaluation criteria that the reviewers will use. That's the next slide, I think. So this is an example for fellowships and stipends. So I would look at these. You don't have to read these, but if you are to go to the guidelines, they're called Notice of Funding Opportunities now. Go to the page where it says, what are the review criteria? And from those review criteria, go back to your narrative and start crafting it this way. And the examples will show you on the website as well. So the first is always the intellectual significance of the project. So that needs to be front and center of the application. And then they will ask about how well it is described. So that's where the jargon comes in. It has to be clear to as many people as possible. Number 3 is, I mentioned already, we need to have a sense of your timeline. So you want to talk, people sometimes write, I'm going to write my book. 12 months, I'm going to write my book. This is not going to work as a work plan. So you want to break it up in 3 months times, or in periods of times where you say, I'm going to write chapter 1 through 3 in the first 3 months, or in 1 month, or in 5 months. Or I do research for 6 months, and break it up so that everybody knows exactly what you're going to do with the time. Then your CV, build a CV. There's only 2-page CV for this application. Sometimes people say, oh, my CV is 20 pages. How do I have 2 pages? So again, we have to craft it in a way so that it speaks to the application the most. So I'll put everything in that's related to the project, and everything else that's not, I would leave out. And then number 5 is the criteria of feasibility. And so, yeah, we can skip that. I think I'm gonna proposal, make your case. I think they're all, I mean, I want to stop here. There are tips for writing, what you can do, but these are probably things that are less important than the ones that I really want you to use the criteria, talk about the criteria, and make sure that you create the narrative and the CV and the bibliography as a package. And then there's a writing sample. So they should go together. And it's a little bit of work to put these together. And believe me or not, I did the math last time at the deadline. 50% of all applications come in on the last day. Please don't do that. So it's gonna be a problem with tech. Sometimes if you run against, it's a hard deadline. So if you run against the midnight hour, it's really, we can't change it. They don't let us. You can't go through. It's like a hard gate. They won't let us go through anymore. So don't apply on the last day. Yeah, I'm going to stop here. Happy to talk, to answer questions if you have.
Yes, we have. Thank you so much, Claudia, for that presentation. It was really helpful, and some really, really wonderful tips too. That's so appreciated, that insight. We have a couple of questions, and one of them was, they're kind of technical questions, some of them. Do most or all grant programs from the NEH require U.S. citizenship, and are there fellowships
yes.
for graduate students?
Great question. Fellowships is for U.S. citizen and for people who have lived in the U.S. the last 3 years consecutively. So if you have resided in the U.S. and you live here, like have you done your PhD or been teaching, you're eligible to apply. At this time, we do not have any programs for graduate students. We do only do postdoc fellowships. Good question. And if I may say, we're always looking on the other side. I didn't talk much about the review process, how it actually is done in practice, but we're always looking for reviewers. So if you're interested in learning how this process looks from the inside, please send me an email and say I'm interested to be a reviewer or a panelist. We'd love to have you on board.
There's a question about the success rate of summer stipends. I think that was answered,
about
right?
10%.
Yeah. And Ben Williams was asking about the 10%. Yeah, you were focusing more on the individual support, but for institutional projects, is it 10% for indirect costs, or how does that work?
It's much so the success ratio is much higher for collaborative projects or institutional projects, just because individual programs have so many numbers. So we get about 1,200 applications for fellowships and 1,000 for summer stipends. So collaborative, for example, and scholar editions, they have a funding ratio more like 16 to 24% in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
So because they have lower numbers.
Yeah. I believe he was asking about the costs.
Indirect costs?
Yeah. Is it 10% for indirect costs?
No, there's no requirement. I mean, that's up to the applicant, and overhead is up to the institution. So that's not fixed.
Okay. Yeah. I think that UIC puts it at 10%.
Okay.
Right. And he also asked, are these open for non-faculty staff?
The fellowships or
Yes,
for anything?
the
Yes.
fellowships or the stipends?
Yes. So if you are not for summer stipends, where you technically would need two, or you only get two per institution, but if you are unaffiliated, if you are, I think, not a permanent faculty, you can apply even for summer stipends, and you can apply in any case for fellowships. You don't have to be affiliated or faculty. You can be a staff, or they're open.
Okay.
You don't even, for fellowships, technically, anybody can apply. You do not have to have a PhD to apply to fellowships program, but you cannot, the only requirement is that you cannot be enrolled in a degree seeking program. So you can apply with a BA, with an MA, or with nothing. It's just you cannot be enrolled.
Okay, interesting. We have a question about one of the evaluation criteria was to avoid over-reliance on gap filling.
Yes.
It's a question about what that means.
So sometimes people, when they apply, they say, oh, I have this project on, I don't know, X, and this has never been done. And I'm filling this gap, scholarship has neglected this so much. And, so then the reviewer will say, well, it's not enough. Just because there's a gap doesn't mean that the gap has to be filled. So the gap itself is not a good justification. You have to give another justification saying why this needs, a positive one that needs to be done. Where is the importance of it? And then you say, well, it hasn't been done. And then people say, oh, yeah, sometimes it's really interesting. People say, oh, yeah, this should have been done. Why hasn't it been done? But this alone, the gap alone, is just not enough.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that. I think that could work for institute fellowships as well. We're running up on our time here, but I just had one question for you that I've sometimes noticed about NEH grants and fellowships, and that is, I think it works with anything at the NEH, but maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there is an emphasis on avoiding obvious political points of view. And I was wondering if, just wondering to myself as you were speaking, whether that accounts for some people's hesitancy, because lots of people do projects that are very immersed in one kind of political perspective or another. Did you have, I don't know whether there's much to say about that, but do you have insight?
There's a lot to be said. I mean, yes. So again, we're a federal funder, and there are, if you look at our guidelines, there's a page where it talks about what we do not fund. So, and what we do not fund in this in fellowships and in other fellowships, especially because it's individual projects, is anything. So they talk about anything that has a political agenda, some kind of activism, no policy studies either. So anything that's driven by a certain agenda driven, we call it. This is so what does that mean for all our normative, like political theorists like myself? And so there's a fine line to be walked, I think, and we talk about this all the time because there are many and now with sort of the new emphasis on equity and racial equity and climate change, and so there are topics there that we do want to support, but we're always going to be looking for that balanced view in the project. And we can talk about anything political. It's really about the how it's presented, and if there's a balance in there. And that's sometimes, people look at it different ways, but from the peer review side, it's about that balance. And then what happens politically later, that's some other question. Does it help at all?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think that's that really does help quite a bit. So thank you so much, Claudia, for joining us. I really appreciate the time, and also all of that expertise that you bring to the table. Very, very helpful. And I know that it's helped everyone here listening in, and that we do have the session recorded, so we'll be able to have that for further reference. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. And if you want to distribute my email, if anybody wants to follow up with questions, I'm happy to do that. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I am going to stop my share right now.
I'm going to mute
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. All right, Jeff, I'm going to hand things over to you to give your insights.
Okay, thanks. And can people see the little outline that I shared? Okay, that's just to give you a sense of where I'm going. And please feel free to interrupt me. I think I can't quite track the chats or people raising their hands while I'm talking, but I'd be grateful for any just interjections or interruptions if you just unmute and stop me while I'm going along. So I'm certainly no expert on applying for fellowships, but I've read a lot of advice and applied to a lot of things and found certain advice most helpful, and I thought I'd highlight what was most helpful to me. One thing was preparation, and Claudia emphasized this, but I would say I need to give myself at least a month to 6 weeks ahead of an application deadline to get started. And one thing I like to do is to check out the application portal and actually start the application process on the application portal early, because there are technological oddities, and I find it helpful to see how it works. And then, like Claudia said, to research the guidelines on eligibility and focus and criteria to make sure I'm a good fit and tailor my application accordingly. And I really do find helpful, a lot of places offer sample applications, or they'll tell you recent awardees, and I find that very helpful. With recommenders, the big thing I would say is that you need to give them a lot of time to ideally give people a month, but at a minimum, I would say a couple of weeks. And you want to pick scholars, I think, generally who are in your field, but ideally not at your own institution. That's probably different if you're applying from grad school, but people who know your work really well and can speak knowledgeably and with awareness of the different fields you're contributing to, And I found it helpful to try to think about asking recommenders who are diverse in terms of the audiences I have in mind, or this, if I'm working at the intersection of different subfields, to look for recommenders who will direct their comments to how my work fits into different subfields, and then recommenders who come from different backgrounds themselves. And really important is picking recommenders who are reliable and easy to work with, who will get their letters in on time, well, again, enough said about that. I do find it useful also to send polite reminders, a week ahead of time, a few days, to be checking the website to see if the recommenders have turned in their letters, and if not, to send them reminders. In terms of instructions, Claudia had mentioned the importance of reading the instructions carefully, which does seem very important to me. And one thing especially important in that regard, I think, is what to include and what form they want it. And my sense is usually funding organizations don't want you to include things that they didn't ask for as supplementary. And if they tell you the form in which it should be, it's important that it be in that form. So that's a thing I pay a lot of attention to. So then a few comments about the project description. Obviously, you, like Claudia emphasized, you want to really keep in mind the focus and criteria for the program and institution you're applying to, and the audience. And often, I think you're applying, as Claudia was saying, with the NEH to a general scholarly audience. And I find that a challenge myself. My sense is that the best thing is it's not about simplifying things or avoiding complexity. It's about inviting scholars into the complexity and telling them why it counts, so that the thing that I think could make the application interesting is that you are inviting them into an area of some scholarly density and activity. And if you can be kind of a good guide to the evaluators, here's what's happening in my field that is, and here's why not just me, but other people working in this line of work are focusing in this way. I think that's been the most helpful to me in terms of keeping in mind the audience. I mentioned the structure of the project description, and I gather that can really vary. Some people do, as I did, a single kind of long prose statement without subdivisions. You can have subsections divided by category, like overview, method, plan of work, and so on. You could have an introduction followed by chapter summaries. But I have the sense that among the most important things is the first paragraph, that you really want to come out. You want people to have a clear sense within the first page, ideally within the first paragraph. This is what I'm working on. This is what I'm actually going to do, and here's why it counts. So you kind of want to get to the punchline, I think, quickly. Key question you're addressing, your main claim, and how you're going to develop it. Claudia talked about the significance, which is hard, but explaining the significance of the question that you're addressing, usually both for your relevant subfields and then for, let's say, the humanities more broadly. My sense is that generally doesn't mean that they're looking for, kind of pablum about the humanities, but that they're looking for a concrete sense of, this is a particular kind of work. There's a lot of energy in it right now, and here's its humanistic significance. And I think the general advice that's been helpful to me is that you want to demonstrate the significance. You don't want to spend a lot of energy asserting it, just claiming a lot of significance for your work. I think it's better if you write it so that your subclaims make clear the why the larger argument is significance, and then there's not a need to trumpet it. You want to, in terms of focus, the thing that I found helpful is to think in terms of carving out a clearly defined window on a big world and not getting lost in the big world that it's a window on, but you want to tell recommenders how your project is concretely focused and delimited in terms of its subjects and its sources and parameters, and then the reason for those choices, why those subjects and sources and parameters, as well as here's what I can see through that window. Concrete examples and evidence I find are helpful, as opposed to a project that a description that remains at too vague or general a level of generality. You don't want it to be overly abstract. And then in terms of relation to other scholarship, again, my sense is you don't want to get lost here in a critique of other scholars' work. What you want to do is say what's current, what's important, what is the work that you are building on, what's the work you're challenging or augmenting, and then how is your work how is it distinguished by the questions you're asking, by your theoretical approach, by the sources you're exploring? What is it? What's your particular purchase? I found it difficult, but I do think it's expected to have some discussion of method, theory, and approach. I find it difficult because it's not something I normally foreground myself, but what I don't think you want to do is to write a kind of methodological or theoretical manifesto, unless that's the kind of project you're doing. But the point is for you to allow people to know where you're coming from, what's informing your work. Then I think you want to give some sense of what will be the parts of the finished work as you're envisioning it. It could be a chapter outline. It could be just a sense of sections. And like Claudia said, a plan of work. And my sense is that the funders want, they want it to be plausible and realistic. You want to say, what have you already done? What are you going to do during the fellowship? And then what will you do after the fellowship, and what will be the finished product? And Claudia had said, which I hadn't thought of, also that you may think about what you're going to do between the time you're applying and the time the project starts. But in any case, I have the sense that they want to know what you're going to actually do in that year and how that's going to add up, where that puts you in terms of your finish line. You want some discussion of you, the author. That is, I think Claudia said this too. How did you come to the project, and where are you headed with it? How does it fit into your intellectual or professional trajectory? And if it's based on a dissertation, how do you anticipate changing or developing it into a published product? What kinds of particular skills or expertise or experience or perspective are you bringing to the project so that they could feel a match between you and the project, so they don't wind up thinking, great project, why should that person do it? And then a couple very brief pieces of general advice, and these are, I don't really have any basis for saying these couple of things, that's just my opinion, but one is that I think for a proposal you want a really rich question, and it's more important than a definitive answer. It's something you're going to do. If you already have the answer, I think it makes it less clear why the project needs to be funded. So I think what you want is an open question, like a real thing that we don't know, and that we need, and a sense of why the question is important, and how you're going to get there. More important than a definitive answer, and it kind of relates to my other just highly biased prejudice, which is I think that it's good to lean into complexity or subtlety that is, and this may relate, although I don't know if it relates to what Claudia was saying in response to Mark's question about politics, that sometimes my sense with these projects is that you may find yourself joining a choir, or a team of lots of people who share your general views or perspective that inspire you to do the work, but that for a scholarly project, you want some sense of something hard or complex or subtle that makes the project inviting and opens up a problem rather than shutting it down. I put on here a bibliography. I just was going to say that I think if they ask for a bibliography, it's helpful to use that to complement your project description, not to repeat it. So, in other words, use the bibliography to show something you didn't show in the project description, like engagement with various subfields that you intend to contribute to relevant work that's inspired you or with which you're in conversation, especially if you didn't have a chance to discuss it in the description. Your CV, you want to make sure it's up to date. That's the big thing. I have to check myself on. And then revision, I was just going to say, I find it absolutely essential, and it's why I need a lot of time to prepare, to ask people to read it and then give them a couple of weeks to do it, and then give me at least a week to revise it after they do. And they need to be people outside my immediate subfield or discipline. So that's time consuming, but I just find that there's no way for me to write a halfway decent proposal without having at least two people outside my field given a couple of weeks to read it and talk it through with me. I think I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and say what I have to say, and then we can both take the Q&A together, because I see there are some questions about letters, and we can discuss that. But I'm not going to go over a whole bunch of the things that you already talked about. I think it's wonderful how you went through the different areas of the proposal, and I'm going to make a couple more general comments. One is that for the Institute fellowships, somewhat like the NEH, it is an interdisciplinary panel, and you have to write with the expectation that you'll have people from history, philosophy, the languages, art history, so on, reading your proposal. And so writing in a way that reaches out to other disciplines, and that doesn't get too immersed in jargon that is really, really specific to your own, that you can't imagine somebody else in the humanities understanding, or do a little bit of effort at translating. Be careful to read the directions for the fellowship. Things like the word count. It is a limit of 1,500 words for the Institute proposal. It's really impossible to disguise a proposal that's too long and it looks ridiculous when you do. Like, try to use small print or something. Don't do that. Just pay attention to the word count, and number the pages, keep to a 12-point font, do all of the things that we do, that we expect our students to do to make the paper look legible. And also looking at the directions for what the ingredients for the proposal are, as Jeff was talking about, to clarify the stakes of the project and give the necessary background for it. I think it's really good, in addition to having the very strong introductory part of the proposal that gives the overview of the project. I think it is generally very helpful to give a chapter by chapter summary if you are doing a book project, because often people want to know, what does this project look like? And just giving a kind of narrative, and there's no recipe for it really. Some people break it down chapter by chapter, or some people narrate their way through what the book looks like. But however you do it, giving people a sense of the sequence of events in the book will really help people to get a picture of what the whole project looks like. And that can be very helpful to everyone. There is a question that came up already that's something that I do like to address in a really general way, and that is the humanities emphasis of the project. How do you do that if you are not in a traditionally humanistic field, or if you're in one of these departments or fields that has many different tentacles in it? And the question was specifically about sociology, but it's applicable to lots of different disciplines. And I think, say, for people who are doing field work or empirical work in any discipline, it's important to be able to say how the work you're doing is humanities oriented. And how you do that can be to draw on those parts of the humanities that make it humanities. That is history, cultural context, a theoretical context, theoretical or philosophical context. Those are the elements of any humanistic work: history, theory, cultural context, and just reaching out to the reviewers of your work to show them that your work is drawing upon those conversations that we tend to identify with humanistic inquiry. Let's see. I also think this is sort of repeating something that Jeff was talking about, but situating your work is very important. I think it's worth repeating here that talking about the field that you are intervening in, and who are the voices that, what are the voices that are out there, and what kind of impact do you want your work to make? I think this is really important, and either naming specific scholars by name, or at least gesturing toward the work that's being done in a field in order to say what you're doing to contribute to it, can really show people the impact of your work and why your work needs to be written. And I guess that goes to Claudia's point about how just filling a gap isn't enough. It's fine if you're filling a gap, but you want to say, what's the intervention, what's the contribution to your field and to the humanities in general. And I think let me say a little bit about the bibliography, just to build on what Jeff was saying. We do ask for bibliography. at the Institute. And I think thinking about the bibliography as a little window into your project can be very helpful, because obviously you can't list every work. That's not possible. But when you're writing for an interdisciplinary audience, I think it can be helpful for you to signal that you're aware of major conversations across several different fields. So if you are, if I'm writing about the history of the novel, it can be really helpful if I'm writing something about the history of the novel to show that I've actually maybe read something about French novels or German novels, and I'm not just obsessed with a period of 20 years in England. That I'm aware of the conversations beyond, and that can help just to signal that in the bibliography that I'm not entirely narrowly focused on one particular issue. And even better, if your proposal can actually show that you're not completely narrowly obsessed with something, but you're aware that there are conversations elsewhere. About the letters, a couple of questions have come up about the letters, and they're really great ones, and I'm not sure whether I have the best answers, but here's a stab at them. One other thing that I'll say about them is that if you're in your second or third year, if you are an early career scholar, it's best not to have dissertation advisors or dissertation chairs writing letters, or anyone on your dissertation committee, or anyone. It's never good to have someone write a letter who has either taught you or who has worked with you. So just, avoid the really close contacts in that way. If you're, I should say, let's say if you're beyond your second or third year, if you are a first or second year professor and you use one person writing your letter who was on your dissertation committee, I don't think anyone frowns on that. But if you're beyond that, if you're beyond your first or second year, you should be seeking beyond your committees, seeking beyond people who had you in the classroom or were in mentoring capacity at your university. So that means seeking out people who you have met at conferences, who you've collaborated with in publication. So this is a good reason to think about when you're going to conferences, get to know the people who are coming to your panel, and who, when someone comes up and says to you, wow, that was a really great paper, I would love to see that paper, could you send it to me? Send it. Send it, and there's the person who can potentially write a letter for you. The other questions about letters, if you have, and Jeff, I'd love to know your opinion about this as well. I think that when you're writing letters and you are writing very, very far outside your field, that that it can be good to have someone from outside your field, and you may not know very well, say why you're the person to be writing why are you the person to be writing this book? Because what you don't want is a committee looking at you, at your work, and saying, well, why are they writing this? Like, this isn't really built up from the years that they've done as a scholar. This just is coming out of left field, and why are they the person writing this book? So answering the question, why are you the person to write this book, can be done by someone who is an authority in the field that you're going into. I also think that it can be still good to have one, possibly two letters from people who really know your work, who can talk about the impact more largely, and then weigh in on why you're moving on to this project. And Nicholas's question about the scholars outside the US, I think that is fine. It's important that you have people who know your work and who can explain why you're doing this project. And if they're not from the US, I don't think that that's the most important thing in the world. You know, the fact that some people's names may be recognized a little bit better by some people on the committee, I don't think that counts for a whole lot. It really is about speaking to your work. Jeff, do you have further things to say?
The one thing I would add there is that I think it's really helpful to equip your letter writers with what they need. You know, it's great if you can send them your project description, so they can write directly to the project, especially if you know, that's not the work they know. So they know other work. So then you give them the project proposal, so then they can speak directly to it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that. That's so important. Preparing your letter writers with the abstract, or with at least a rough draft of that abstract, so that they know what they're writing for. That has actually come up with people, you know, when people see an application and there's absolutely no comment about the current project, people wonder, well, why is no one talking about the current project? That's really good.
And Mark, just to pick up on something you were saying, my sense in general is that the detail and depth of what they're able to say about your work is much more important than the perceived stature of a letter writer or prominence. A kind of very general letter by somebody who's really an expert in the field, but is not an expert on you, is a weaker letter than the other way
around. Absolutely, yeah. And yes, I really think that's true. I mean, especially when you think about how the people who may be names to, you know, us when we're in the trenches in our own fields, you know, we think that they're well known, but actually, you know, to someone who's working in another discipline, actually they're not. So you may think that the gravity of their name is significant, but it's actually not in the application, but rather it's what they have to say. It's the quality of the letter. Right. That's right.
I have a question for you, Mark. I have heard, but I don't know that this is true, that it often can work quite well to reapply when you don't get a fellowship, wherever it is, and then you get the feedback on it, that you're in a good position to reapply in a subsequent year and make use of the advice you've gotten. In other words, to think you have a kind of a foot in the door, as opposed to thinking the door has been slammed shut and you should knock elsewhere.
Yeah, I thought that was just really fantastic advice, especially with some of these external fellowships, you know, not just the NEH, but lots of library fellowships are, you know, they're not plentiful and they're very hard to get. And so I really loved her strategy there, and it's something that everyone could really take very seriously going forward. Because the mantra is always the same. It's, people say, apply, apply, apply. You can't get a fellowship if you don't apply. But I think that little insight there just makes that mantra into more of a tangible strategy that lots of people could really take under advisement. I think it's really great. So it implies that even when you're not ready, even if you're not quite ready, then it's almost worth going ahead and doing it.
By the way, that I would emphasize what you just said has been true for me. That I find the process of applying propels me forward. It's also time consuming, so it could take time away, I suppose, from one's work. But for me, it's usually been the other way around, that thinking my way into how to apply for something actually does give me traction that I didn't have before I started applying.
Yeah, I found that to be true as well. That it actually does help with conceptualizing the project when you're doing the proposal. It's definitely true for me personally. Are there other questions that we can answer for people? And did we answer the questions that were asked about the letters? Does that make sense to people? And the question about other disciplines, please let me know if that didn't make sense. Anything else? So we will.
Could I ask a quick question? Sorry, thanks. Just curious about interdisciplinarity. I know you said that obviously the panels reviewing applications are interdisciplinary, and it's important to write to a broad audience in that sense. Do you also look for interdisciplinary research projects in the projects themselves, or is that not necessarily one of the criteria?
Yeah, that's a great question. The projects don't really have to be interdisciplinary. Interdisciplinary work has been around for an awfully long time, and lots of us do it, and we do it in all kinds of different ways, and it means something different for different people. For a lot of people, at least for me, it means talking about novels and dabbling in about 3 other subjects, but novels and poetry. But there are different versions of it. But we've had I can just speak from the Institute standpoint, that we've had very successful proposals and projects that have been very firmly rooted within a discipline. And the success of them the success of the proposals, to get the project funded, has depended upon the ability to translate those terms enough so that everyone can see how this particular set of questions is relevant to other questions that people ponder and that are interesting to them. So it can be very much rooted. I think of, I'm sure that he won't be embarrassed by this, my mentioning Peter Hilton's project from a few years back. Peter Hilton's project is on, logic and philosophy. It wasn't really an interdisciplinary project, but he had a way of explaining it to show why it seemed urgent to people who studied from lots of different vantage points. And so that was why it was a successful project. And it's why, when you go to hear a lecture by Peter Hilton. He's great at making things that seem very specific to the discipline interesting and vital for people outside it. So that's all I would say about interdisciplinarity. The project itself doesn't have to be.
My own work is not pretty. I don't think of it as very interdisciplinary. I think of it as pretty solidly rooted in history, but sometimes I found it helpful to think either about training I've had or kinds of literature that I'm engaging, just to signal to scholars that the work would have interest beyond history. But I do have the sense that projects that are actually intrinsically that really are conceptually moving across disciplines or rigorously engaging with more than one can be very attractive, and that's a thing often to highlight.
I guess history is often just interdisciplinary in its nature because you do.
We're done. Yeah, right.
It's like you talk about economics, law. There's the convergence of different things in your work. I was surprised that you didn't think it was interdisciplinary, but again, I guess that's the way in which people have their different definitions of what interdisciplinarity actually is.
I mean, I guess there's a difference between your subject being one that you're interested in, art, literature, science, religion, philosophy, as opposed to your perspective and conceptualization of the project being sort of driven by what is really happening, what's cooking in multiple fields, which that's where.
Yes, right. There was one question here about whether I am willing to review proposals, and yes, I'm happy to do that. And what I do is I will read proposals and I'll make an appointment to talk about the proposals with you. I tend not to think it's great to review proposals and do it over email. I don't really like to do it that way. So if you want to send me something, I just won't. It won't make sense to do it I can't do something like a few days before the due date. But just give me some time to take a look at it, and we'll make an appointment over Zoom or in person, and we'll talk about it. I'm very happy to do that. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jeff, so much for all of this advice. It's really helpful to see it coming from your side of things. So really great. Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone for coming. I hope to see your applications at the Institute, or equally great will be having you apply to the NEH or some other external fellowship and get one to get those numbers up at the NEH. Bring the money in. Bye, everyone.